What's up, YouTube? Today I'm going to talk about the movie August Underground's Mordum. And so first I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, when I first watched this movie, how I felt about it, and prior to learning a little bit about the director and what the movie's actually meant to be. And then after I talk about that a little bit, I'm going to talk about what the director said, how he felt the movie should be interpreted as. And then just talk a little bit about what he had to say, because he definitely had some different interesting things to say about it. So I guess I'll just start by what drew me to this movie. I always just kind of, if you are a fan of like extreme horror, like horror movies at all, you've most likely heard about this movie, because it's kind of gone around the internet as this whole like the most disturbing movie ever made. And I mean, depending on what you classify as disturbing, I guess yes, you could definitely classify this movie as one of the most disturbing movies ever made. But so I guess first we'll just talk about when I first watched this movie, how I felt about it. So when I first watched this movie, the movie has almost no plot. It's basically just about three people who go on this huge killing spree, and it's just about the sick things they do along the process of doing that. And so within like the first 10 minutes, I already really did not like the movie, because I didn't really understand why there's nothing at all going on other than people just getting tortured and killed. It didn't make sense to me why the audio was so horrible, and why the actors in the movie didn't really have any dialogue whatsoever. They mostly just kind of screamed and said the F word over and over and over, and there was basically no dialogue. And so, when I first watched this movie, it was almost like I didn't really understand it fully, because I kind of watched it as, I went into it thinking like, this is going to be a movie that I want to see and hope is somewhat decent. So, kind of watching the movie and not really going into it with, the right state of mind, kind of, I think, made it so that after I watched the movie, I was kind of, like, disgusted by it, because this movie is definitely very repulsive. And if you have a light stomach, or you're even close to that range at all, you definitely should not watch this movie, because, I mean, this is the type of movie where it's probably the only movie I've ever seen where it's had certain scenes that have stuck with me, because it was just so horrible. If you want to find out about those specific scenes, look at the Parents Guide under IMDb, or just watch the movie. But yeah, there's definitely some really interesting stuff that happens in this movie. But so yeah, after watching it kind of first, I definitely didn't understand it, and it kind of just almost pissed me off a little bit that it even existed, because I didn't see the purpose of it. All I kind of felt was like, this is just a way for the director to kind of get off to something he likes. And so it kind of pissed me off at first, but after letting it settle in for a couple days, I kind of thought about why was this movie created, and what was the director's actual intention of this movie. So I did a little bit of research about Fred Vogel in general, and I found a couple different interviews on YouTube with him, and I highly encourage you to check them out, because he's actually a really pretty down-to-earth dude, and he seems really level-headed, and he's really interesting to just like listen to and hear some of the stuff he talks about, because he has the company he works for, Toe Tag Productions, which releases this film, obviously they release a lot of other really extreme and sick films, and it's really interesting to see a guy who seems like a very level-headed guy and stuff like that, and to make this stuff that's just so like repulsive and sick. And so after watching the interviews with him, I kind of understood the movie more and actually appreciated it a little bit, because Fred Vogel set out to make this movie so that you absolutely hate the characters in it that are the main characters who are doing the killing. And I mean, by the time you're about 10 minutes in the movie, you already hate them. So yeah, he does a good job at doing that, because I mean, the characters they're annoying. They do nothing but scream and scream and scream, and the things they do in this movie are just so, like, they're so horrible that you absolutely despise the characters by the time you're done watching the movie. And I thought it was interesting because I always find it interesting that usually when I'm watching a horror movie, especially one that involves like a kind of a serial killer type of person, in the back of your head you're not really rooting for the people as much. You're kind of rooting a little bit more for the serial killer because that's who you want to see. Just think like any movie that has a serial killer, Nightmare on Elm Street, just Child's Play, It, all those movies. Even though you're kind of rooting for the characters to live and stuff like that, you still like seeing the serial killer, and you like seeing him, do his thing and like just all that good stuff. But this movie is completely different. It's like you despise these characters by the time this movie is over, and it's honestly amazing how much this movie makes you hate those characters, because it really does. And another thing, he set out to do is to make this an actual, simulated snuff film. And when you think about it, if the goal of creating this movie was to make a simulated snuff film, then personally I feel like he did succeed in what he was trying to do. Because honestly, if you showed this movie to a person who's never even seen or heard about this movie at all before, you could probably convince them that this is a real snuff film just based on how bad the quality is. And the bad quality mixed with the effects being pretty good together, kind of mixed together, and make this movie, it looks really genuine. And so that was one thing he talked about in his interviews, is that he's always kind of liked the reaction of when people didn't know it was, just a fictional, it's just a movie, and they thought it was like a real snuff film and were just disgusted by it. And after you read up about like some of the stuff that happens in the movie, if that was a real snuff film, that's definitely something you would not want to see. But one other thing he talks about that's pretty interesting is about how the actors played a role in the movie, because he actually himself acts in the movie. And one thing that was very interesting to hear him talk about is the difference between how far some of the actors would go to get like that genuine, authentic, just crazy, feel. And with him himself, he was just kind of saying, it's the movie stopped, where the movie magic stops, like all the effects and stuff they're using, it's obviously not real and it's just movie magic. But one interesting thing he was talking about was how one of the actors or actresses in the film, her name, I'm not sure of her last name, but her name's Christy, and I think in the movie her name's Krusty. And he talks about, there's one scene where she cuts herself with a razor blade a couple times, and he talks about how, like, when they were shooting that, she actually was cutting herself with a real razor blade. And it just kind of shocked him a bit, because he's so used to just being like movie magic. It's just movie magic. You don't actually, you're not actually doing this stuff like to really make it seem that real. And I just thought that was kind of interesting, because it was almost like he was a little bit. I'll put the link to the interview in the description, because it's really interesting to watch. It's almost like he was a little bit uncomfortable by the fact that they went that far and stuff like that. And it's definitely really, really cool to watch, because the actual movie August Underground Mordum is a collaborative effort between him and some, I think he's in a band, and so his name is like Killjoy or something like that. And so that movie itself was actually less of his creative direction and more of just like a collaborative effort from all of them. And I think some of the more of like he used the word like method acting to kind of talk about how they got across certain scenes where they did kind of act more, like it was more real than. For example, he was talking about how like one time when they were finishing up a scene, everyone in the cast and stuff were just all finished up, and they were just back to normal and stuff like that. And then I think one of the dudes who played in the movie's name is Michael. Um, he actually might be Killjoy. I'm not sure. I just looked on IMDb and not too long ago, and so I'm not too sure. But him and Christy, he was talking about how, after they wrapped up and stuff like that, they were still in character and going crazy and stuff like that, and acting like they wanted to kill people and things like that. And it's very interesting to watch something like that, especially with a movie being created that's so extreme like that, to see these, just hear from this guy who makes this movie about how even like as extreme as he wants to make this film, he's still it's still just a movie, and that's all he really wants it to be, is just go as far as a movie. And it almost seemed like it bothered him a little bit that these actors were going beyond these boundaries of it's just a movie, and we're kind of like crossing, they're actually cutting themselves in a scene where they can use something that's fake and stuff like that. And so I definitely encourage you to watch that. It's very interesting, and I think after watching a couple different interviews, I actually do appreciate, maybe not appreciate, but understand these movies quite a bit more, because if you watch the interviews with Fred, he's actually a really level-headed guy, and seems like a pretty cool guy. And I really got the vibe that he wasn't trying to make these movies just to like get off, and that he loved violence and stuff like that. Obviously he likes violence to a degree, but he didn't just make these films just for his own personal enjoyment. And I think that his whole idea of he wanted to make a horror movie that shows the ugly side of serial killers, and that actually is like a simulated snuff film, and I really think he did succeed in doing that, because I mean this movie is really one of the most, in my opinion, one of the most difficult movies to watch, just because of how horrible the things they do, and just it's really just not a easy movie to watch. But overall, I definitely wouldn't watch this movie again. It's something that I've watched once, and I'm fine watching once. I will not watch again. I won't watch the other two in the series, just because now that I know the intention of the movie, I've seen it once. I've seen, it did its job. It can be a simulated snuff film, so I don't really need to see another one that's just going to do the same thing, because I just don't really see a point in watching the others. But I think, now, would I recommend this movie? No, just because of the fact that there's just, unless you want to just try to see a simulated snuff film, I mean, that's what it is. It's a simulated snuff film. So if you want any movie with a story or character development, or scenes with emotion and things like that, this is pretty much the farthest movie you can get away from that, because I mean this movie has almost no character progression, no fucking like barely any story whatsoever. Literally the story is just three people who go out on a killing spree. So unless you're drawn to that idea that you just kind of like the same way I was, you just want to see just how disturbing this movie can take it, then I do recommend it, if you want to see how disturbing some, I guess, movies can take it. But other than that, I can't really recommend this movie. I think one thing to keep in mind, though, about, to just think about in movies in general, after watching this, I've kind of learned this a little bit, is when you don't understand a movie at first, it's not always good to just label it as like, oh, this is just for the director's personal enjoyment or something like that. It's always good to do a little bit of research about the director and why they created the film, and what they meant by it, and what was their intentions by it. Because when you actually look at his intentions for it, it's not this weird, sick, like self-pleasure intention. It's more of a fact that he wanted to just create something that really made you despise serial killers, and just create something that felt very just authentic to a snuff film. So yeah, that's basically all I got to talk about tonight. So again, if you're interested in simulated snuff films at all, check these out. No matter if you're not interested at all, I definitely think you should check out the interviews with him. There's a couple, and they're all pretty interesting to watch. But yeah, the guy's name is Fred Vogel, and if you just look it up on YouTube, there's a couple different interviews with him. So highly recommend you watch those. And then, you know, after you do watch those, if you kind of get the vibe of like, oh, well, I see what this guy's saying, I want to hear what you know, see what this is all about, then yes, it probably would be better to even go into the movie that way. And I kind of wish I did go into the movie that way, just thinking originally, like, you know, I need to figure out first what this movie's all about before I just jump right in. So that's about it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.